The sound of steel doors clanging shut echoed through the prison, followed by the sharp voice of a guard announcing lockdown. In one of the cells, a man pressed his hands against the cold concrete walls. His mind was racing. He had whispered to other inmates about a plan, about a chance, however small, of escaping ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States. But tonight, as alarms flashed red and armed officers swarmed the hallways, it became clear why this place had earned the name the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Every move was seen, every sound was tracked, and every inch of the prison was built to crush hope. Guards in the towers pointed their weapons, and the man's plan dissolved in fear. He froze as boots thundered closer. What would happen to him now? ADX Florence, built in the remote desert of Colorado in 1994, was designed for inmates considered too dangerous for any other prison. Terrorists, cartel leaders, gang bosses, and violent criminals had all been sent here. The nickname Alcatraz of the Rockies came from its reputation for being escape-proof, like the famous island prison in San Francisco Bay. Unlike Alcatraz, though, ADX had never closed. It was stronger, harsher, and its walls seemed unbreakable. Every detail of ADX was carefully planned. Cells were made of poured concrete with steel doors. Windows were so small and angled that inmates could see only a slice of the sky, never the horizon. Exercise yards were cages, one prisoner at a time, surrounded by high walls with mesh overhead. Even there, inmates could not see freedom, only the sun above. Movement was limited, conversations were rare, and isolation was constant. One of the most extreme parts of life inside was the silence. Inmates often spent 23 hours a day in their cells, eating meals passed through slots in the door. The quiet could feel heavier than chains. Some prisoners tapped on walls just to prove to themselves that someone else was nearby. Others paced endlessly, counting steps until numbers blurred together. Guards patrolled constantly, their eyes trained to spot even the smallest act of defiance. Still, in prisons, whispers always travel. Stories spread about inmates imagining escapes, about digging through walls or overpowering guards. But at ADX, those stories ended before they started. Razor wire, motion detectors, and gun towers ringed the facility. Armed officers could respond in seconds. Even if a prisoner somehow reached the outer fences, beyond them lay miles of barren desert with no food, no water, and no place to hide. The man in his cell knew all of this. He had seen others break under the weight of isolation. He had heard of inmates losing their minds, screaming into the night, or banging their heads against the concrete. Yet, still, the thought of escape was tempting. ADX was called escape-proof, but wasn't every prison supposed to be? And hadn't men before found ways out of impossible places like Alcatraz? The thought burned in his chest like a secret. On calmer days, prison routines gave the illusion of normalcy. Guards delivered trays of food. Inmates read old books or wrote letters to families they might never see again. Some prayed, some worked on puzzles, or stared for hours at the slice of sky visible through the window. Time moved slowly, grinding men down. A week felt like a month felt like a year. ADX wasn't just a prison. Yet the man's mind kept circling back to the idea of freedom. He had watched how the guards moved, counted the seconds of each patrol, memorized the sound of gates opening and closing. He thought about ways to test the system, just a small act, something that could tell him whether ADX was truly unbreakable. But deep down, he knew the risk. One mistake and the punishment would be severe. The night of the attempted plan was different. The alarms had cut through the silence without warning. Guards rushed, radios crackled, and spotlights swept across the blocks. Inmates shouted, some in panic, others in wild hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had tried to beat the system. From behind his door, the man's pulse raced as he heard a voice down the hall yelling, "We've got him!" The man leaned closer to the door, his heart hammering. Had someone really tried to escape? Or was this the system tightening its grip again? He pressed his ear against the steel as the guards marched past, dragging someone in chains. He couldn't see the prisoner's face, only the shadow on the floor stretching long under the flashing lights. The guards' voices were sharp, angry. The echoes of that slammed steel door lingered long into the night.
Inmates whispered through vents, speculating about who had tried and failed. Some thought it was a cartel leader. Others believed it was a man who had once escaped another prison and wanted to test his luck again. Nobody knew for sure, but the truth didn't matter. What mattered was the message. Nobody could beat ADX.
The following morning, the prison returned to its routine. Guards marched the tiers, eyes scanning every door. Breakfast trays slid into cells. Outside, the desert sun rose, casting a pale glow over the razor wire. But the silence was sharper than usual. Every prisoner knew what had happened, and every guard wanted to remind them of the consequences. For most, the message was clear. ADX had been designed to remove that very thought. Every corner of the prison was built to prevent communication, movement, and hope. Windows were angled to block sight lines, yards were cages with mesh ceilings, and doors opened only with electronic controls from multiple guards. Inmates never knew exactly when they would be moved or where they would go. The system thrived on Still, memories of Alcatraz floated like ghosts in prison lore. Decades earlier, men had cut through vents, tunneled through walls, and vanished into the San Francisco Bay. Did they drown, or did they reach freedom? No one ever knew. That mystery lived on, and at ADX, inmates sometimes clung to the idea that even impossible places could. Days blurred into weeks. The man in his cell returned to routine, pacing endlessly, counting steps. He read what books he could, sometimes the same pages over and over. Letters from family came rarely, filtered and checked before reaching his hands. The isolation wore him down. The silence pressed heavy, and each night he remembered the sound of boots and chains from that failed attempt. Then came a day that broke the silence again. An alarm blared suddenly during mid-afternoon. Guards rushed past his cell, their radios crackling with codes he couldn't understand. Inmates shouted questions, but no answers came. Hours later, rumors spread like wildfire. A guard had been attacked during escort duty. Some said the inmate had sharpened a piece of metal. For the prisoners, the incident was both terrifying and thrilling. Terrifying because punishment would rain down hard. Thrilling because it proved cracks existed in the system. If a man could strike a guard, maybe another could do more. In the man's mind, the thought flickered again. Maybe there was always a way. He tried to push it aside, but the idea kept crawling back. The response from the prison was swift. More lockdowns, more searches, meals delayed for hours, guards patrolling in pairs instead of alone. Every sound of keys jangling now carried extra weight. The desert outside seemed to press closer, as if reminding everyone there was no escape. The man sat on his bunk, staring at the slit of sky above, thinking of how far freedom was. Nights were the hardest. The silence made thoughts louder. He remembered the stories of men who had gone mad inside ADX. Some screamed until their voices broke. Others refused to eat, fading away slowly. The mind was both enemy and ally. For the man, his thoughts twisted between despair and determination. Could he live the rest of his life like this? Could anyone? His fists clenched. Then one night, footsteps echoed again outside his cell. This time they didn't pass. They stopped. The door slid open, and two guards stepped in with flashlights. "On your feet," one barked. The man hesitated, fear gripping him. Was this routine, or was he about to face the same fate as the prisoner dragged away before? Chains clinked as cuffs locked around his wrists. He was ADX. Florence is not just another prison. It is a fortress carved into the Colorado desert, built to end hope before it begins. Every wall, every door, every shadow is designed to remind inmates that escape is not possible. For those inside, the world shrinks to 7 feet of concrete, a slit of sky, and the endless silence that follows them day after day. The prison has held some of the most infamous names in modern history. Terrorists, cartel leaders, mob bosses, and violent offenders have all walked through its gates, only to vanish behind layers of steel and stone. Once inside, their power fades. Their influence, feared in the outside world, becomes useless in a place where no one can hear them and no one can follow. The nickname Alcatraz of the Rockies was not given lightly. Alcatraz Island once stood as the symbol of America's unbreakable prison, but time and history eventually closed it. ADX Florence remains different, stronger, harsher. Decades after it opened, no one has ever escaped. Even whispers of hope are silenced quickly by lockdowns, watchtowers, and the endless stretch of desert waiting outside. Critics argue that life inside borders on psychological torture. Stories of men losing their minds, of endless days spent pacing in silence, paint a picture of a place where the punishment goes beyond the loss of freedom. Supporters, however, see ADX as necessary, an answer to criminals too dangerous for society and too powerful for ordinary prisons. To them, ADX is not cruelty, but survival. The truth sits somewhere in between. ADX Florence is both a shield and a warning. It shields the public from those who once spread fear and chaos, and it warns every inmate who enters that there will be no escape, no second chance, and no life beyond its walls. Unlike Alcatraz, which now stands empty as a tourist attraction, ADX is alive, functioning, and filled with stories the public will never fully know. Its silence speaks louder than its stone, reminding the world that some places are built not just to hold men, but to erase the idea of freedom itself. And so, the legend of ADX Florence endures, a place where the most dangerous men in America are locked away, where escape is only a dream, and where the concrete walls whisper the same truth day after day. This is the end of the line.